Welcome to Origin, Remember Your Truth, a podcast for everyone who senses there's more than meets the eye. I'm your host, Anna Hochwald, and I'm really excited that you're here. Together, we explore what lies beneath conditioning, roles, and learned identities through energy, intuition, and lived experience. This is your invitation to remember your inner truth and to feel what's true for you. Take what resonates and throw out the rest. On today's episode, I'm joined by Saskia von Diest. She holds a PhD in plant pathology, is the founder of Ecofluency, an award-winning consultant, facilitator, educator, and activist in the field of nature communication. We'll be talking about her personal journey, how she communicates with nature, and how we can all relearn to do so as well. Saskia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you for coming. So, I would love to know what it is that you do now and a bit about your personal story, maybe as well, if you would like to share that, how your connection to nature started, maybe as a kid. It was always like this. Listen.
So, my journey with nature communication, I would say consciously only started about 14 years ago. Because as a child, I always felt like there was something more. But I was raised to believe that there is no God and that the earth is ending and that there's nothing you can do about it. And I decided to, deny that teaching and choose to believe that there is magic in the world. But since I was about 6 years old, I really wanted to become a scientist because I thought that that was the best way to find the solutions to the problems that we face in our world. And I studied agriculture because I believed that rather than looking for ways of helping people at the end of a health issue when they already are ill or diseased, wanting to find out where is the source of that. And very often it would start in the soil. And so wanted to address that also for food security issues, all kinds of reasons. I wanted to go into agriculture. And so I did a PhD in plant pathology. And during my PhD, went to an animal communication workshop. And it wasn't part of the PhD. This was just because I'd heard about it during heard about it at a friend's birthday party. So heard about it, was like, wow, this is new, a new concept. And I'd only ever come across the concept as a child in a cartoon or in movies or in books. And I thought, that's really cool, but it sounds like something I couldn't do. So I'd not grown up being able to do this. And obviously, to be clear, it's something that I'm sure you also know now, is that we can all do this, but we've just forgotten. So I was starting to go on my journey of remembering. And about a year after I first heard about it, I went to this weekend workshop. And in this weekend workshop, I got to have the experience of communicating with animals through photographs and getting information that I could validate. And I'd had no way of knowing that information beforehand. So it was really special because it was completely mind-blowing to me. It was an ontological shock. It was a complete crumbling of my worldview, my perception of reality. And it was a re-enchantment. So everything in my life changed at the time. I finished my PhD and ended up doing 7 years of postdoctoral research. And because I'd started out with animal communication, I was curious, obviously, because I studied plant pathology, that's agricultural plant diseases. Can this be done with plants? Can it be done with the organisms that cause disease, the pathogens themselves, the bacteria and the fungi and the viruses and the protists and anybody else who causes illness, causes dis-ease, bringing you out of alignment, out of ease. And found out that obviously one can. But it took me a few years of practicing before I felt comfortable to be communicating with plants and trees and then rocks and rivers and all of the other beings with confidence and with accuracy. So yeah, it was a rocky journey, and the progress wasn't always linear. And it took also a lot of courage to stick to the fact that I'd had my own experiential evidence, my own embodied truth, rather than only going by what I've been taught. And I lost friends along the way. I was engaged at the time when I first got into animal communication, and that fell apart because I'd gotten too weird. Gladly.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're just jealous.
Yeah. Well, I realized that I'd had these experiences, and no matter how much I tried to show my fiance at the time that this could be real and this is something he could do as well, it's not something that he was up for. And it was a hard lesson to learn that it's not about trying to convince other people. And I'd spent so much time trying to convince others of it, that even during my postdoctoral research, I became frustrated that I felt like I was always trying to prove this to others, interviewing farmers and finding out how they were using nature communication to inform their practical management decisions and on their farm. And then, that kind of research is really useful, but it obviously had to fit within the modern scientific paradigm. And at the time, it was difficult to get that published, and I had to adjust my wording of it to be about farmer intuition rather than intuitive communication with nature. So I constantly was diluting and compromising and fitting myself within a bubble, and then decided, okay, I'm going to quit academia, not because I don't find that it's useful, but because I felt like I'd stopped needing to understand how it works, and I'd become more interested in the fact that it works and that it's important that we do this, and that everyone can learn this, and that it can be practically useful in the here and now for people's everyday problems, professionally, personally, globally, collectively, as long as we relearn how to rekindle this capacity, something that we have always had as an ancestral skill and have just forgotten that this is not only our duty and responsibility, but great power and gift that comes with this. And so that's what Ecofluency does now. So I left academia and I founded Ecofluency at the end of 2020, launched it officially in the middle of 2021 at Solstice. And so I launched Ecofluency officially in the middle of 2021, and I started working through offering people consultations with nature. So I would be the translator, essentially, communicating with any aspect of nature that somebody wanted me to communicate with, whether it was their animals, whether it was their land, whether it was their ancestors, whether it was the plants in their home, their gut microbiome, the spirit of their organization, any aspect of nature. Because in my worldview, nature is everyone. Every single being in this universe constitutes nature in my worldview. And so that's part of an animist worldview. And if you perceive everyone as having consciousness, then you can have relationship with this being, and fundamental to relationship is communication. So everything becomes everyone. And your imagination is the limit to what is possible with nature communication. And I should also clarify that it's sometimes known as intuitive interspecies communication or just intuitive communication. I choose nature communication because it goes beyond just working with the intuition, because intuition is an important aspect within receiving information from the more than human. But there are other ways, other channels of information as well. And also it goes beyond species, because at least in the Western reductionist materialist scientific framing of what a species is, it doesn't include those other beings that exist beyond the physical. And it doesn't include ancestors, and it doesn't include other planets. And yet those are beings with whom you can communicate as well. So I tend to use the terminology nature communication as an umbrella for what is possible. And it just then depends on how you define nature and communication. So when we are communicating, we're communicating through a whole wide range of sensory awareness. And that can be, depending on which map you look at, that we can actually have dozens of senses. And those can be through your thoughts and emotions and your feelings, through dreams, through inner vision, through clairaudience, which is being able to hear clearly, a whole wide range of ways. And some people will find that it's easier to communicate in one modality and others in another modality. But ultimately, because humans are nature too, we all start out as nature communicators because we communicate with each other. And this is not so much a reconnection with nature because we already are nature. So it's actually more of a dissolution of the illusion. We're dissolving the illusion of disconnect. And then it's not about reconnecting, it's just remembering our connection, remembering our true beingness, that we are nature itself communicating with the rest of nature. And so another part of my work, in addition to the consulting, is teaching people. And I really love teaching people because it helps them reclaim their skill. And I do that online and I do it in person. I love working with people in various different countries because I get to have an experience of how their perception opens up to nature communication. I get to have these experiences of having my own worldview expanded through their lens, their experiences. But most importantly, for me, nature communication, from that very first weekend workshop, the biggest realization wasn't that I could communicate with any aspect of nature, because that in itself was like, wow, that's huge. It was more that I didn't have to feel lonely ever again. And I hadn't realized how lonely I felt before then. And I wanted to offer other people the experience of feeling so deeply loved and connected with all of nature that even if you got lost on a desert island and you managed to survive, you could now communicate with the sea and the sand and the sun and the ocean and the fish and the birds and the plants and everyone else there. And of course, maybe, if you didn't have humans around, that would feel lonely in a certain way, but you would know that you were actually supported by the entire wisdom and intelligence and power of nature if you knew how to ask and how to listen. So I think of this not just as a responsibility for co-creating like everyday solutions. I think of it as, and not just as a critical survival skill, ultimately. Because once you can communicate with a landscape, it means you can ask the landscape also, where is food, where is shelter, where is clean water, where is it safe for me to navigate through, to walk through. But you can also feel on a deep level that you belong. And that's something that so many people often don't realize that they're missing. That through displacement, through war, through colonization, through all kinds of atrocities that have been committed in our past, in our ancestry, and what's currently also being done to many people, is that their feeling of belonging, not their actual belonging, because we all belong to the earth, but their feeling of belonging gets shaken and sometimes even shattered. So one of my goals with teaching nature communication is offering them the tools, offering them the direct experiences of feeling what it's like to belong again and to find their own way back to experiencing the deep, vast love and support of all of nature that is available to all of us.
Wow. I think I need to process all of that because it was an amazing journey. And what you just said about belonging or the feeling of belonging, I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that. I personally am I'm going to have to think on that later because that just resonated a lot. And it's amazing that you are sharing this with the world to get other people to feel, because I think most people just want to belong in some way or feel like they belong. So it is one of those essential needs that humans have. And if we're just in nature, then, or we are nature, we do already belong.
It's such a primal thing, we
Yes.
forget that we we've evolved within tribal communities, and it was dangerous if you didn't feel like you belonged, if you didn't feel like you could fit in, you could be cast out into the wilderness. So that feeling of belonging is a deep-rooted fear that we all have, which is, makes perfect logical sense, but we forget how deeply rooted and emotional it can be. And so this, I have found, helps to grow beyond that feeling of needing to just belong to human society and remember that we belong to all society and all culture on this earth and beyond, and in many different times and dimensions. And so it's a re-empowerment, I'd like to think of it as, for people, because it's now so difficult to feel like, where do I actually belong? And people are told, well, you have to connect to your ancestral roots of where you came. But we're so multidimensional. We don't just come from our blood, lineage, ancestral roots. What about other lifetimes? And I specifically say other because I don't think of time as being linear. So it's not past lives. I think other lifetimes, because we bounce around in the, I don't know, maybe spiral, circular, all happening now
Or
system.
it's parallel or whatever.
Yeah, all of it. So it's like, where do we actually belong? And I've had like consultations with people where we've traced that their spirit actually first evolved on another planet, an extraterrestrial planet, or maybe a different dimension. And they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. That's why I feel this and this and this way. And so this is something that people can have access to themselves to understand what is the root of their belonging. And then also, how do they belong here and now? Because they've taken form in this life as a human in this body. So it's exploring the many different ways in which we can belong. And then how does that feed into your everyday life,
So, how did you remember to communicate with nature? Did you go or walk that path alone after this animal communication workshop?
That is a very good question. Partly yes and partly no. So
I mean, alone, you have nature, so
yeah. So I had the first workshop that I did, which was with a very well-known animal communicator. She was my very first animal communication teacher, Anna Breitenbach. And there's that documentary made about her called The Animal Communicator. And that was life-changing. So that was, to date, probably the single biggest shift in my worldview in my entire life. That changed everything for me. And I've had other major experiences since then. I could count on one hand, like really, really major experiences that are pretty far out. But that was the beginning of the rest of my life. And so the first weekend workshop, I felt like I needed to practice on my own, and I did. But then I went to other weekend workshops, and after the advanced one, we ended up getting together with some of the people who stayed in contact from that weekend workshop, because there were about 30 to 40 people in each of the weekend workshops. And in the second one, there were a bunch of us who wanted to keep practicing. So we got together a little sort of like practice group, peer practice group, and we met once a month on a Sunday afternoon at each person's different house. So we rotated, and we would bring photographs of animals that we knew but nobody else had information about, and we would pass them around. And this is how we would practice and build up accuracy and confidence and trust in our skill, which is really important. Like, the ego-based logical mind does need that validation, because otherwise it can very easily explain even the most magical experiences that you have direct experience of. And so we would do it like that. And then sometimes I would have my own wild experiences of like a plant calling out to me in the middle of a grocery store, and I'm like, what's going on? And plant asks me to take her home, and tells me exactly how she wants to be looked after. And when I finally get home, I look up on the internet, what does a poinsettia need? And it's exactly what she's already told me. So those kinds of experiences also happen, spontaneous experiences. But I would say that practicing with a group was probably the most surefire way of developing the skills in a way that I could trust, because you have that intersubjective validation within a group. Then you're not making it up, so to say. And even,
yeah.
say this as well, like even 14 years down the line, I sometimes still feel like a beginner. Despite having a lot of experience now, I still feel like a beginner, because I'll still meet doubt and I'll still need validation sometimes when really far out things come up in a consultation or a communication with some aspect of nature. And I'm like, surely that's not real. and then I get a bit of validation. I don't always get validation, but when I do, it's really nice because then I'm like, cool, not crazy, still on track. This is great. People can still pay me to do the work.
Yeah, the not crazy aspect is, I think, something where a group comes in handy, because then at least, oh, we all get the same weird signal. You can feel a bit better about it. The ego can calm down because at least then we're a group of crazy people.
It's a form of belonging.
And exactly. And I would like to know, how do plants call out to you?
Good
Is
question.
is it in different forms, or do you have, like, is it clear audience for you, or?
So the way that we were taught was to open up the sensory awareness and see, how does the body listen? How does this, what I call the listening instrument of the body, respond? And because I think that it's more because of the scientific training placing more of an emphasis on the sense of vision, I saw images a lot more in the beginning, and I'd sometimes hear the internal voices. And then later on, I was able to like activate more of the feeling body and other sensory awarenesses as well. But the spontaneous experiences I've had with plants were voices. Like I'd hear and I thought that there was a person around me, but I didn't hear an actual voice. So I'm like, I'm hearing this in my head. Okay, I've gone mad. Cool. And then it turns out, no, this is a conversation, because this is how telepathy happens as well, right? Is just a calling out from this plant, but she's sending the message, and my body, my being receives it as clairaudience. And then there have been other times where, when I'm tuning in with a tree, communicating with a tree in person or remotely, then it will come through either like that as a voice in my mind, or in images, or sometimes it's just clairsentience. Is it clairsentience? Yeah, just clear knowing, just not.
I think that's claircognizance.
Sorry, claircognizance. You're right. Yes, just that deep intuitive knowing without knowing how you know. And yeah, clairsentience is clear feeling. You're right. So it happens in many different ways, and I've developed my skill set to be able to listen in many different ways so that I can offer better service to clients, and also for my own experiences. But it's taken a while to refine that. You know, it's taken me years to develop that. And with some other people, it also takes them equally as long. And other people, they get it like this. So there's no guaranteed path that your development takes if you're getting into nature communication. Even though now I teach like a set framework of how to do it, it's just guidelines ultimately. Like some people will have really magnificent experiences from the very get-go, and others will take quite a while to really feel and hear and see and get it messages that they can trust, because often it's not about, do you get information? It's, can you trust that the information is not what you are projecting or imagining? Which is tricky, because your imagination is also the way in which nature communicates with you, because you're getting images in your internal vision, and it's going to use your frame of reference and your experiences to form images in your mind. So it's working with your imagination. And so it can be tricky, but it really just depends on what is your actual makeup internally. What is your skill set? But it can be developed, is my point with all of this.
I agree, it can. And with practice, you can discern whether or not you're making the image up, or whether it just comes through. Or for some, you don't need to practice that much to know, okay, I made that up, or I did not make that up. You just know that that's not mine.
Yeah. I mean,
that again, that's a feeling.
Yes, it can
Or
be
knowing at some point.
Exactly.
Depending. I mean, it's different maybe for some people, there's a label. Imagination, this just came through, or whatever.
Yeah. And what's tricky as well is that sometimes you'll get a thought and you'll think, that's my thought. but there's no preceding like reasoning why you have that thought. And I had this actually today with a client, or yesterday, sorry, where she would keep having the same thought to do something that she would ordinarily never think about, to do a particular ritual and make an offering to her land at a particular tree. And it was like, I feel like that's the land speaking to you. It's planting that thought in your mind and asking you in that way. And that's sometimes like nature will trick us into thinking that our ideas are our own, but it's actually just like nature's creativity, like giving you that, like, here, have that idea. Bless you. Take that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
another trick for anybody listening is that the weirder and the more immediate it is, I can almost guarantee that you did not make that up.
Yeah. And if the resistance to actually do that is large, then also most like you didn't make it up.
Yeah.
Like when I communicate with my guides, and sometimes I get these ideas, let's call them ideas, that are not mine, that I would definitely not make up. No, I wouldn't do that to myself.
Yeah.
Like, why put myself out there? No, this isn't my idea.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
Yeah. But you're being called to do something. When people say, I feel called to do this, you are being called to do this. It's how you choose to respond. Mm.
So when you consult the land, in which context do you consult the land, or what are you doing there exactly? What's happening there?
When working with land, an important thing to remember is that it's quite a complex ecosystem. And the land is going to be mirroring what's happening with our internal terrain, our internal landscape. So within, so without. And of course, there's more going on as well. There are other patterns of interference, memories held in the land. And so a big part of my work as well is helping to clear away any misaligned or toxic or harmful energies, patterns, possibly even entities in an energy field, whether it's of an individual, of a group, of an organization, of a piece of land. And the reason for that is that removing those blockages allows for the natural flow of vitality and healing to happen within that system. And what's also important to note is that when an energetic clearing is happening, I'm not the one doing the clearing. I just happen to be the communicator who knows who to ask within nature and how to listen to what needs to be done. So a lot of my clients will come to me and ask to consult on a piece of land where it's, let's say, what is going on with this particular body of water? Why is the well suddenly dried up? Or why are the trees dying because they have this sudden attack of an insect or a pathogen? Or there'll be all kinds of questions. What's going on with the fact that we've done everything? We're organic, we follow regenerative farming principles, we've done everything, but yet there's not enough. Like there's still blockages, it seems, within the behavior of a herd of cows or in the growth of a field of crops. So my job then is to have a conversation with the intelligence of the land and the unseen elements of the land and ask, hey guys, what's happening? And often this has not been done for a while on a conscious level. So a farmer, food grower, land stewards, guardians of landscapes are listening often to the land, but they might not be listening fully because they don't know how. They've not been taught how, or they're too busy and they can't discern it. So they just need help in being able to listen. And so sometimes it's to find out basic things like where to put a building and when and how and so on. Or it's what is preventing this field of crops from producing, or why has there been a sudden decline in the crops or sudden onset of disease when there should not have been. And so my job as nature communicator becomes a translator of the conversations that humans typically find more difficult to hear, that the logic cannot perceive as easily. And so that happens in the same way as nature communication happens with an animal or a plant. So I get the information in the same way, but it really is just a matter of framing. Am I understanding the way that the ecosystem is set up well enough? Like, for example, my typical approach would be communicate with the intelligence of the wider landscape. That would maybe be delineated by mountain, rivers, that kind of thing, a valley. So natural, you could almost obviously say that, like, a valley, for example, will have its own intelligence. A mountain will have its own intelligence. And this is understood across all indigenous cultures worldwide and many spiritual traditions, is mountains, rivers, caves, lakes, they will have their own intelligence, their own spirit, genius loci, overarching intelligence, like guardian, whatever word we choose to use for that, there is a designated being for that space. So I will typically start by zooming out and communicating with the spirit of the wider landscape, let's call it, and find out, how does this being want to show up? What information would they like to say? And then zooming into the actual spirit of that farm or that property or that estate or wildlife corridor or game reserve, and understand what is needed on that level. And so there it's exploring who needs to say what. Is there maybe a pattern of something that's happened in the past? Maybe it feels like the successional process has been unfair, and there's something that needs to happen within the family, something that needs to shift in the family, and how they understand guardianship and how that's passed on. Or maybe there's warfare that's happened and that's held in the landscape. So that pattern of grief is in the landscape, and that's affecting how the animals and the plants grow there. Or it could be that nobody's just explained to the nature spirits that this is now a farm. It's no longer a nature reserve, for example. Or in a building, that it's no longer a church, it's now a home. And can everybody get on board to support that kind of 3D reality happening? Because these unseen elements are the ones who are affecting physical reality. They're the ones who uphold and bring about the operational vitality within the landscape or the ecosystem or the system of a household. So, and I know I'm kind of bringing a lot of concepts into the conversation now, big concepts, but it's to give people examples of what's possible, because really your imagination is the limit. But it's knowing how to go into that conversation to look after yourself in the process. So making sure that you're looking after your energetic security and safety and your psychic hygiene in the process, so that if you're having conversations where there might be earthbound spirits or ghosts, or other potentially harmful entities in the field, or just misaligned patterns, that you can find out about that without it becoming a problem in your energy field. And so that's what I'm called in to do, is just like professional translator, really. And then if something is needed to be done about that, then I'll ask what needs to be done, when, how, where, with whom, and then we'll take it forward. So it's always a co-creative process with whatever level of system I'm working with, and then bringing the client along on that journey, because for them it's also going to be a learning process and a co-evolution process, whether it's a farmer and the farm, or whether it's somebody and the rest of their family, or it's the manager or CEO and their business, founder of an organization, a client and their ancestors. It's bringing systems thinking to nature communication, if I can put it like that. And this has been a much longer answer than I maybe had intended to share, but there's so much to share about this topic.
I'm glad you shared this much and that you branched out this far, because it's not a single aspect that you can answer this with, and it just shows the interconnectedness of everything, really. And also that you really consult nature and don't just go around, oh, I'll clear this land or something like that. But maybe some people do, I don't know. But that it's really a consultation, and then you see what has to be done.
And it's a negotiation.
By whom and how?
Yeah. So to give an example, I had a client in Europe who has she's the guardian of a piece of land, and she wanted to put up some solar panels. But in order to put up the solar panels, she had to clear a whole bunch of trees because it's the only spot on the land that made practical sense. Now, these trees are non-indigenous trees. They're eucalyptus, and the eucalyptus come from Australia. They don't belong typically in Europe, but it's not to say just because they're considered invasive that they should be cut down, because she also understood that it's on the top of a hill and their root systems are keeping the soil in place to prevent erosion. And they've created a certain type of microclimate and are part of the ecosystem now. And they're big old trees. So the conversation with the trees started out as being like, yeah, we're cool with taking 2 of us out. And then she's like, that's not going to be enough, unfortunately, because I have so many solar panels and they need so much space and it's going to block the sun. And then we went into a conversation to explain to the land who she is, what she's doing, what the solar panels are for. And then it was like, oh, okay, well, then you can take out more trees. And so we started like negotiating what, but not just what, but why. So once you have the buy-in from the more than human, it makes it easier to come to an agreement that feels fair. And that was how that particular conversation went. And thankfully, it ended very well. But sometimes you get conversations that end in ways that you would never have expected, or I would never have expected. Another client of mine in the UK wanted me to ask a piece of land why a particular development can't be stopped. And I was told by the land, check your agenda at the door. Just leave that aside and actually just listen. And it turns out that this particular development was going to happen regardless, despite the fact that it was going to affect a wetland quite severely. And it was like, this is not for you to judge or understand, but there's a bigger plan going on. And let go of needing to stop it. But what you can do is offer ritual, offer ceremony, offer love and attention to the piece of land and resource it so that it can call in the necessary guardians and adapt to the particular use of land going forward. So that sometimes is how we can do things. And I say that because there will be some people who might see a lot of animals in industrial agriculture getting harmed or being kept in zoos. And they feel helpless. And there's a lot of guilt and shame about being a human and being part of a species that inflicts so much harm on other species. And I totally get that. And I am there sometimes, and I've been there a lot. What I've learned more and more is that nature is more concerned not that we do certain things, but how we do certain things. What I mean by that is some people will still need to eat meat for their health. It's not that animals are raised, included in agriculture, killed for food, and eaten. It's how they are treated in that process as well. And I say that because I've had a lot of judgment around that, and I had to learn from the animal's perspective a very different stance on this. In the same way that mining in itself, taking minerals out of the land, or stones, or rocks, or crystals, that in itself is not a harmful thing if done in co-creation with the land and with the elementals that are guardian of that place. And that was a very radical thought to be receiving and be taught by more than human nature. And so now when I share that, I offer that with humility and with sensitivity, because I know that can be very challenging for some people, especially now. Many people's nervous systems could be quite activated by that. And I totally get that. And so nothing I say, I expect people to just take on at face value or believe just because I say it. That would be lazy. I say it because I'm speaking from a place of experience from myself, from clients, from students, and offering it as a way of saying, this is possible. Try it yourself and you tell me what you think. So it's an invitation rather than a preaching that this is the way it is. Because nobody can ever tell anybody else what the real truth is. It's always going to come through your lens. Yeah. So I can tell you essentially only what my truth is. And then it's up to you to find out what your truth is. And when it comes to nature communication, it becomes this wonderful tool to explore not just the consciousness in general, but how it plays out on ecosystem level, on our bodies level, on in the level of animals in our home, plants in our home, microbiome in our gut, members in our family. Then it's a matter of then we have an opportunity to explore and expand our perspective of reality and do the zooming out on a very big level, and then zoom back in onto the everyday, mundane, fetch wood, chop wood, carry water level.
Chopping water, why not?
Yeah, some people might like chopping water. Yeah. So
Yeah, continue. Please.
no, I feel like I've been talking so much. You go for it.
Well, I'm interviewing you, so I think that's fine. Regarding the truth part that we can only see, or everyone has their own truth, I really like that, because even if you tune into nature or ask those guides or spirits of the land, then it'll still go through your filter in some way. So it's always, even if you channel some answer, it's still kind of going through your filter. You can't stop that.
Yeah.
So it's important to check in with yourself there, whatever someone tells you or message you receive.
So I tend to, in my consultations, for example, if people are asking me and to tune in, and sometimes they're quite big questions, there's risk involved. I will tell them, this is what I get, this is what I see, this is what I feel, this is what I hear, rather than saying, the tree says this, or your dog says this. And the reason I say it's at risk, because it's risky questions, is because I've had clients who come to me and ask, my dog's very ill. He's had multiple operations. We've had the thought that maybe he needs to be put down, but maybe those clients are against euthanasia. And in the past, I've been, very much, I didn't really have a clear stance on euthanasia, but it wasn't something I would have promoted. And asking a dog how he feels about being put down was a very big thing. And I had to check with myself multiple times. Is this true? Is this accurate? Is this relevant right here, right now for the client and specifically, more importantly, for the animal? Is this what they want? And so this is also where it becomes very important, is which level of this being are you communicating with? And so if one's asking on a physical level, on the body, everyday personality level, you might get a different answer to if you're asking highest self level. Sometimes they'll be aligned, sometimes they'll be different. And ultimately, it's always going to be the client's decision because they are guardian of the animal, for example. But it's been really fascinating. And I've had this happen 2 or 3 times where the human has had this thought that they need to put the animal down, but they're not wanted to. And then they hire me as consultant. And I get that the dog wants help in crossing over because they're in so much pain, or they feel like they're finished with the journey and they don't know how to let go. And so they need help with that, sort of like, just give me a push on the swing and then I can, carry on with the journey myself. And in subsequent consultations, so it's been a validation sometimes for some people. And in subsequent consultations, in particular, this one client and this was the first one where I had the dog being like, yes, I need help, please just do it and it'll be good. And that was quite a surprise for me. And then in subsequent consultations, I see where he is, and it's been pretty far out, like 8th dimensional whale having loads of fun in a different dimension. And I'm like, don't know what to make of that. But I didn't know that was possible at the time. Now I know that it is. And the clients were like, oh, that's beautiful. That totally makes sense, And it's what I've seen is that the way that they had looked after this dog during life, and then also been brave enough to help the dog cross over in a loving way in their home with the animal, holding him in their arms and watching the process, helped for him to catapult in his spiritual evolution, to be able to be like, now I'm an eighth dimensional whale rather than a dog that's come back in another lifetime. Make of that what you will, but that's the kind of thing that sometimes happens.
Yeah. How does that show itself to you, the eighth dimensional whale? I mean, the whale, I could imagine how that visual comes up, but the dimensions, how do they seem to you?
I can't remember the details of that particular consultation, how the information arose or landed in me. It might have just been the knowing that this is now, like, you know how nature communication will break it down in ways that you understand. Like, I will see maybe a picture of a whale and then I'll get the words eighth dimension. And, it could be like that. I won't necessarily see into another dimension. I mean, I have done that, and that can be wild in itself. But that particular consultation, I think it was much more like, because my frame of reference hadn't, at that time, this is a few years ago already, I hadn't yet seen into the dimensions in that way. So I wouldn't have seen eighth dimensional whale, And it was just like picture of a whale and just the words or the knowing, like, this is in the eighth dimension. But the fact that the client's response was so positive, like it was giving them closure and hope. I mean, they ended up hiring me for working with other animals of theirs as well. But at the time, there's no way of knowing whether or not that was true or not. The dog's already dead, but the clients, they are now my priority. At the previous consultation, when the dog was alive, the dog was my priority. But now that the dog had passed on, the client becomes my priority. And then it's finding out, okay, does the dog in different form, the dog's spirit in different form now, in eighth dimensional whale form, want any support? And he was like, no, I'm good. Thank you. That's cool. I mean, they don't sound like that. This is just how my brain like works it out. Like, I use humor to make things in life, and it's a coping strategy. And
I just talked about that today with
really?
another friend, that in these fields we need humor to cope.
Absolutely.
The weirder it gets, the more low level the humor gets.
Sometimes, yeah. And what I realize is that it's in communicating with beings who are far more advanced than us, far more advanced. They like whimsy. They like humor. They like levity, because that's how, I mean, there's a reason that light and lightness and light, there's, unpack that however you will, but there's a reason for that. The darkness doesn't really like levity. So if we're thinking of duality in that way, so being able to convey the information in a way that with humor helps for difficult information to land with people. And I have a particular quirky brand of how I interact with people, as you might have noticed. And I find that
I love it.
Thank you. And it seems like my audience seems to appreciate it. Maybe because otherwise, if I were to try and present it as very somber, it might not land. I don't really trust people who are spiritual who can't dance and laugh. So anyway, coming back to this particular client, the information comes through in different ways. Like now, I will probably be able to see what an eighth dimensional whale would look like if I were to tune in, which I haven't yet done, but I've seen other beings in different dimensions, and it's pretty far out. Yeah.
If you do see that eighth dimensional whale at some point, I'm very curious as to what that looks like for you.
So if I ask now, if I ask the intelligence of nature, what would that look like to the human mind? It's that it's an aspect of whale consciousness that exists in the eighth dimension. It's not in a physical form. It's because it doesn't need to be. It's more like a frequency holding pattern. And to us, the word whale and the form of whale in the 3D reality looks a certain way. But in the same way that beyond death, we don't have a physical form, and neither do whales. Why a whale? Whales are highly, highly advanced creatures. These beings exist on multiple planes of reality. I mean, so do we, but they're actually, one could argue they're far more evolved than us. And so there's an aspect of whale consciousness that exists in that dimension, if that map of reality is even accurate, that shows up almost like this. It's light and it's geometry, but it's not physical geometry. It's like a frequency holding pattern is the best word, set of words that I could use to describe what I see when I ask, what's up with an eighth dimensional whale?
It's so fascinating.
It is for me
And
too.
all, yeah. And new realms just keep popping up every day.
Yeah.
You, like what you said earlier also, that after 14 years, you still feel like a beginner. I think that won't stop.
No, it shouldn't. If I ever feel absolutely certain, I feel like I've lost grounding, then nature comes in and is like, whack, and knocks me over. And then I'm like, oh, damn, okay, huge ontological shock. And this has happened for me in the last month where I've had an experience which I'm still not yet able to fully articulate, but I've had to revisit how I perceive reality and what's possible yet again. So that kind of thing happens, every few years. And at the time, it can feel very destabilizing. But if one always treats it with humor, attempts humility as much as possible, then it just means it's an exciting new adventure. And I feel like my mind is constantly expanded and stretched and stretched and stretched and stretched. And I've had conversations with other friends who are going through similar experiences right now, incidentally, just in the last month or two. And it seems to be what's necessary right now is to really keep ourselves grounded and humble, because that's an aspect of, the word human and humus and humility all share the same etymology, the same root word of earth. And so if we're not staying grounded, we're missing a big part of what it means to be human.
I never saw that connection between those words. Humor is in there as well, kind of.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. You make my point even more. Yeah. And I like to think of humility, humor being a way of keeping humility. Because if we can laugh at ourselves, that's like the best check to see if you have a good sense of humor.
Yeah. And to see if society thinks maybe you're a bit out there. Because if you just, I do that sometimes. I'll just walk around and go through these things that happen to me, and I'll just laugh to myself. Might seem crazy then, but somehow that's also a coping strategy because I need to process. And when I'm outside or walking or moving, then I process. But if you're not in tune with that, it might seem weird.
But how else do you process difficulty other than in a healthy way, in my opinion? Doing that through the embodied process is the best way, because we're given this beautiful instrument in this life. It's the only asset that we actually have that stays with us our entire life. And so it will get hardware and software updates and upgrades as much as our mind. And so to integrate those changes, those shocks, those learnings, the wisdom that comes from our lessons into the nervous system, into the fascia, is as much a part of the evolutionary process as just sitting in meditation. So I agree with your way of working with change, with difficulty, because that's the best way, in my opinion, of doing things. Going for a walk, dancing, moving, finding ways of letting the body process. I find dancing is
Letting the energy move.
Yes, exactly. Letting the energy move.
Otherwise, get stuck. And then we'll get to the dis-ease stuff that we don't want.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you wanted to say something about dancing.
Just that we should be doing it more. I'm always up for a good wiggle. And it doesn't have to look like a dance. It could look as simple as just moving in a particular way, allowing the wisdom of the body to move in whatever way it wants to, because then it's allowing the processing to happen. And I find myself sometimes doing almost a repetitive movement with, like with my wrist, it just wants to keep moving in this one way. Um, or I've found that, like, I remember years ago, I was in this movement medicine ceremony, and I found my arms just brushing the middle of my back, like brushing, brushing, brushing. And I wasn't sure what that was about. And then later I could make a logical sense of it. And I was clearing energy from my kidneys. That's sort of like if you put your hands on your hips and then where your thumbs
Yeah.
are, that's where your kidneys are. And that's exactly where my hands were brushing. And I was like, why am I doing this? And fear is often held in the kidneys. And so I was clearing that away because that was an old stuck pattern of whatever old trauma um, or recent trauma was happening. And so then I could breathe more easily and move more easily. So it's allowing, part of nature communication is, as we awaken this body as listening instrument, is to trust that our body has a certain wisdom, and we can listen to that as much as listening to wisdom from the rest of nature, because this is nature itself as well. This is one of the ways in which we get information from them, more than human, because we have more non-human cells in our body than actual human cells. More bacteria in our gut, like some, depending on which scientific articles you look at, like up to 10 times more bacteria in our gut than actual human cells. And they make up a huge part of our digestion, of our endocrine, our hormone system. They govern what state we are when we make a decision every 20 seconds. And they govern our way of being. So if we are listening to the body, we are listening with more of ourselves to more of ourselves. And then this becomes a really exciting adventure of, oh, wow, I don't even know where I end and the rest of life begins. And then it can become a really beautiful exploration as dancer within the wider ceremony of life. But doing that within a clear container means that you are not just dropping all your boundaries, you are still having clear and healthy boundaries while doing that. So this tension between like wanting to expand, but then also understanding it's not expanding without boundaries, without containment. And yeah, I mean, this is so much of my work. Like there's a retreat that I'm running in Canada in September, which is about this, with a co-facilitator who is a musician. So that's like one example of how we will be exploring awakening the body as listening instrument in this sort of rhythms of remembrance. Yeah.
And how the body then resonates to the frequencies.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, they, if you look at water and frequency, it moves. So for water, we will move internally, externally. And I think one of the very most important things you just said, the allowing things to come through and to allow yourself that your body knows what's right or what has to be done with you brushing, yeah, basically the back of or in the end, then your kidneys, and brushing away the fear. Looking at animals do that. They have that wisdom. They'll shake or whatever when they're stressed. Something we've forgotten.
Yeah.
Society has drilled out of us because it's not accepted or weird, or you just function. You follow that pattern and you do that.
Yeah.
Whether it makes sense or not.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So during that retreat, you focus on
That will be
sound and
yes. So the co-facilitator, friend of mine, he is he's a multi-instrumentalist, and he's also an artist who uses aspects of nature and includes that, like sounds from nature, and includes that. I can't remember the right word for that, but he uses bioacoustics in his instrumentation, in his what do you call it, in his music pieces. And so he's a multi-award winning musician and artist, sound artist. And also very, very highly experienced facilitator. And so together we'll be bringing music, dance, listening in many different ways, awakening the body to be able to be that listening instrument, and also playing music with the body, so that we are opening up, being more of ourselves, and not just being about listening, but about becoming and belonging. Yeah. So that's at Hollyhock, which is a beautiful retreat center on Cortes Island in Canada. And but then for those people who are listening, for for things that might be easier to attend, like online, there's always online courses that I'm running as well. Like I've got one at the end of May, and that's just a foundational 4-week course in learning the basic steps of communicating with the more than human. And that's applicable whether you're interested in animal communication, plants, trees, rocks, rivers, ancestors, any aspect of nature, because the same principles will apply. And it will apply whether you're wanting to communicate with somebody in person, like a tree in your garden, or you want to communicate with a tree that you met once when you traveled overseas and you're not going to see in person again, but you'll be able to still stay in contact because nature communication is independent of time and space. So there are many different opportunities to learn nature communication. And so I teach online and in person. I also, on my website, have a tab called Resources. And then under that, there's a web page called Other Voices. So I also like promoting the work of others in this field. So if anybody feels that they would like to explore other teachers in the field, then they can also have a look at that. And there'll be other things that are coming out in the next few months, but I can't yet speak about those for Ecofluency. There's a lot that's changing and shifting. Yeah. Based on a recent
Cool.
journey that I did in New Zealand. So I was there for 7 weeks, called by the volcanoes, by the lava beings, and that was part of this ontological shock that I mentioned, this like complete worldview shift. That trip was a major part of that. And so that's going to inform some changes to Ecofluency in the future, and stay tuned. So there's a mailing list that you can sign up to on the Ecofluency website, which is ecofluency.org. And I'm also on Instagram, and I'm also on Facebook, and so on. So have a look if you're interested.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to put it all in the show notes. So something someone could do for as an everyday activity now to get more in touch with nature, communicate with nature already without going for the online course. What is it that people could do right now?
So also on the Ecofluency website, under resources, I have a web page called Free Exercises. And there are 3 different, or 4, I can't remember how many different exercises that you can follow on your own. I think they're also audio guided. And so those are examples. There'll be more added in the coming weeks and months. But for now, those are examples of how you can already start to experience communing and communicating with nature, including awakening the wisdom of the body, as a listening instrument that's available at any time. And that's for free on the website.
Cool. Do you have a message for the listeners? Something, yeah, if there's one shift they could take away from this conversation, what would it be? Or should it be?
I'm going to just ask what nature would like to share rather than what I would want to share. So the words that come, and this is quite high level, big picture thinking, but I'm hoping that it's the energy and the frequency of the words that will land with people. The words are: be at peace within yourself. There will be war, there will be drama, there will be all kinds of things that happen in your life. But finding that still place within yourself is going to be the most beautiful and most valuable thing to be doing right now. Be at peace within yourself and find your truth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's let that sink in with everyone listening. So Saskia, I really thank you for bringing your perspective into the world and into this conversation. And really, I truly thank you for your time and you sharing your wisdom and journey with us today. I think this will move many people to also change their approach and how they communicate with nature, but also with life and with themselves. So, yeah, thank you for that.
May you all be blessed.
Oh, for the listeners, if you have any questions or want to know more about certain topics, let me know. My contact data and Saskia's contact data in the show notes. And if this episode resonated with you, rate, leave a review, or share it with someone who might benefit from it. I hope this touched you in some way, sparked a thought, or ideally a feeling, and may you move through your day with curiosity, awareness, and a little more of your own truth shining through. See you in the next episode.